It's coming in, it'll pass behind the sun in October and then come on its way back out. So James Webb is observing it right now, or just a couple of days ago was observing it.
The James Webb Space Telescope spotted a large object about 10 light years away moving toward Earth.
James Webb has captured something strange in our solar system, and no one in the mainstream media is saying anything about it. The data from the examination does not match known comets, asteroids, or debris drifting in from deep space. Behind closed doors, researchers are re-examining assumptions they thought were settled, because if the readings are correct, then this object does not belong to any category we currently understand. The object that refused to behave like a comet.
It gave us a sense of where we came from and also where we are going.
James Webb has captured something strange in our solar system, and no one in the mainstream media is saying anything about it. That sentence did not come from a headline or a press release. Rather, it came from internal chatter among astronomers who realized that one particular object was refusing to follow the rules they relied on to understand space. All along, 3I Atlas has been officially classified as an interstellar visitor. That label alone meant it came from outside our solar system, carrying material older than Earth itself. At first, scientists expected a familiar story. Interstellar objects are rare, but they usually behave like comets once they approach the sun. Heat increases, ice vaporizes, and a faint cloud forms around the nucleus. This process is predictable, slow, and well understood. But with 3I Atlas, that expectation collapsed almost immediately. As the object moved inward, telescopes did not see the usual pale cloud. Instead, James Webb detected a thick green halo surrounding the object.
This is a worldwide telescope all these countries are willing to make to reach the edge of the universe.
The color came from diatomic carbon, which is a fragile molecule that normally appears briefly before breaking apart. In known comets, it fades quickly and never dominates the coma. Here, it did not fade but intensified. It wrapped the object completely, as if being sustained rather than released. Scientists flagged the anomaly but tried to remain calm because chemistry in space can be strange. But then, something appeared that could not be brushed aside so easily. A structure formed that pointed directly toward the sun. Comet tails always point away from the sun. This is not a theory or an assumption, but basic physics. Solar radiation pushes dust and gas outward, creating a tail that streams behind the object like smoke in the wind. Yet 3I Atlas did the opposite. Its so-called anti-tail pointed inward, toward the source of radiation that should have been pushing it away. Public explanations leaned on camera angles and perspective effects, but internally those explanations did not hold up. The geometry was wrong, yet the structure persisted across observations.
Step through a situation where an asteroid is discovered so many years ahead of time. Here are the possibilities of what could happen next.
It did not behave like an illusion, but behaved like a maintained feature. James Webb's infrared data made the situation more uncomfortable. The green halo was not random or smooth, rather appearing layered with bands that brightened and dimmed in sequence. But natural outgassing does not happen in organized phases. Comets leak, and they do not pulse. What Webb saw suggested timing, not chaos. Then came the observation no one expected to see at all. X-ray telescopes detected emissions stretching hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from the object. While comets can produce X-rays through solar-wind interactions, these emissions were unusually intense and stable. X-rays at that scale usually require violent interactions or powerful energy sources, and cold interstellar debris drifting through space should not produce them. Yet the emissions were there, and they did not flicker or vanish. The stability of those X-rays was what unsettled researchers the most. Random interactions spike and fade, yet these emissions held steady.
It looks so harmless, a few pixels. You realize what it means to actually see another planet moving around the sun. It's incredible, I think.
Implying an ongoing process rather than a single event. That was when the speculation began quietly. Some experts insisted that this was some form of exotic chemistry. Some said it was caused by unknown surface reactions. Models were proposed and adjusted, but they ended up being quietly set aside when they failed to explain everything at once. By this stage, the language used in internal discussions reportedly changed. Scientists stopped asking what type of comet 3I Atlas was. Instead, they began asking whether it belonged in that category at all. Still, every defining behavior used to classify comets, asteroids, or debris seemed to break down under closer inspection. Nothing about the object was dramatic in the way movies portray danger, as there were no explosions, no sudden movements, or any obvious threat. Instead, there was something far more unsettling. It was a calm, steady violation of expectation unfolding slowly, data point by data point. 3. I-Atlas was not acting broken. It was acting consistent. And that consistency is what made it impossible to ignore. And as researchers moved past appearance and began examining the object's chemical makeup, the idea that this was just an unusual comet became even harder to defend. A chemical profile that should not exist.
Of the near-Earth asteroid, we should be able to compare and tell what the near-Earth asteroid is made of.
Once the first structural anomalies were logged, attention shifted to something far more intimate, what the object was actually made of. This was supposed to be the part that grounded the discussion. Chemistry does not lie, and spectroscopy in particular is considered brutally honest. Light passes through gas, fingerprints appear, and arguments usually end there.
The surface gets warmed up and the ice turns into vapor, gas.
That was the expectation when researchers turned their instruments toward 3I Atlas. No one expected the readings to look like this. The spectroscopic instruments revealed something that made a few of the technicians stop mid-log. It was methanol and hydrogen cyanide, both at levels far higher than anything ever recorded from a comet passing near Earth. Scientists had seen comets release volatile compounds before, but these precise and consistent ratios did not match any natural model. The silence in the room was almost tangible. The flow of molecules didn't pulse in the chaotic, unpredictable manner one would expect from heating ice. It was continuous, almost controlled, as if the object contained internal reservoirs that were releasing chemicals on some unseen schedule. Heat alone could not explain it. Pressure gradients, sublimation, outgassing, and everything in standard comet theory fell apart under the data. The scientists tried to rationalize it quietly, but no matter how many models were run, none fit. Each failed attempt only deepened the unease. And then there was what wasn't there. Water vapor, the lifeblood of every comet.
We thought comets only released light gases. Water vapor
accounted for less than 1% of the emissions. It was not 10% or 5%, but less than 1%. For an object that seemed so active, that level of water was impossible under conventional physics.
Researchers explored water activity on the comet and provided the first clear evidence that it was shedding water.
Comets are ice-rich as they melt, release, and jet. But here, something fundamental was missing. The usual engines that drive behavior in icy bodies, which are the very physics scientists trusted, had been silently removed from the equation. The object was active, yet lacked the primary mechanism to explain that activity. Some discussions reportedly took a darker turn. In whispers behind closed doors, researchers asked whether the chemistry was merely surviving the journey across interstellar space or whether it was being actively preserved. Perhaps, one suggested, the object had traveled for millions of years, and yet these molecules remained intact, untouched by radiation and collisions, somehow maintained against the odds. Another posited that it wasn't just preserved, but could be producing them deliberately and systematically. No one said it aloud, but the tension made the room feel smaller. The object's very existence was beginning to read like a puzzle that shouldn't have an answer. Even casual observers brought into the control room for a moment reported unease. There was something inherently wrong about an object so consistent in behavior, so precise in its chemical output, and so utterly incompatible with expectation. The mood shifted quietly from curiosity to discomfort. Scientists began questioning assumptions they had relied on for decades. Questions like, what is this made of, and where did it come from, now felt inadequate. They started asking questions that had no answer. Why does it exist this way? And more disturbingly, was it ever meant to exist at all? By the time the data logs were compiled for review, one thing was clear. 3I Atlas was not just unusual, but impossible. And the more the scientists examined it, the more impossible it became. Each measurement, Each spectral line, each persistent emission pulled them deeper into a truth they weren't supposed to confront. Perhaps this was not a natural visitor, that the rules the universe had always followed, at least in their models, might not apply here. And if the chemistry was deliberate, and if the object itself was controlling the release of these compounds, then nothing about its passage could be taken at face value. The quiet realization settled over the room like frost. They were no longer observing a comet. They were watching something that had been designed or had designed itself to behave this way. And the implications of that thought were enough to make even the most rational researcher pause. As the chemical profile defied explanation, the object's movement path through space began to compound the mystery, suggesting intelligence or at least deliberate control beyond human understanding. A trajectory that looks calculated, not natural. Tracking 3I Atlas as it moved inward was like watching a slow-motion heist unfold. The first movement anomaly appeared in the raw orbital data when the object began accelerating in ways that should have been impossible. Gravity alone could not account for its path, and yet when scientists tried to attribute the shift to outgassing, the math didn't fit.
The plume of gas around it is mostly carbon dioxide, 95% by mass, based on the Webb telescope data.
Jets of material should have pushed it in line with their visible emissions, but they didn't. The direction of motion, the speed, and the consistency did not obey the rules. Rather, it looked like the comet knew where it wanted to go. The second anomaly was harder to ignore. 3I Atlas was following a retrograde trajectory that skimmed the orbital plane of Venus, Earth, and Mars with chilling precision. Each pass was nearly perfect and aligned as if the object had been plotted on a map.
And we have a better idea of the orbit of this object. This might be a brand new, unknown, potentially hazardous asteroid.
Rather than left to chance. Astronomers ran the numbers, and they were shocked to see that the odds of a natural interstellar object threading that needle were astronomically low. One orbital dynamicist, normally cautious with words, called it engineered-looking in a leaked internal memo. The phrase was not meant for press release because it wasn't something any scientist could say lightly. The object's movement was the kind of alignment that didn't just happen. Observers noticed that 3I Atlas avoided the kind of chaotic encounters that typically scatter cometary paths. Its timing minimized gravitational disruptions while maximizing observational windows from Earth-based and space-based instruments. The path was not approximate but looked refined, as if subtle nudges too small to detect directly kept it stable and visible. Every calculation and simulation suggested intention behind the movement, even if no one could explain how a cold rock from another star could intend anything. The tension in the room rose as the object approached Jupiter. The planet's massive gravity should have torn the trajectory into chaos, scattering the object like debris in a storm.
This is the first time something like that is observed, where there is a glow ahead of the object towards the sun.
Instead, 3I Atlas skimmed the planet's hill radius with uncanny accuracy, even though this was the very region spacecraft engineers use for gravity assist maneuvers. Any natural object passing through this zone faces risk, and a tiny deviation could alter the path dramatically. Yet this object emerged cleaner than it entered, with its trajectory even more stable than before. DataStream's JWST didn't show random deflection, but control. It was as if the object had leveraged Jupiter's influence deliberately, borrowing energy without being disturbed. By this point, the scientists' conversations in observatories began to shift tone. The question was now, could it be navigating? Some researchers hesitated to say it aloud because the idea of an interstellar visitor making decisions and charting its own course across millions of kilometers of empty space sounded absurd.
Trajectory which is perfectly aligned with, and that is something that cannot be explained just by observing or imaging it.
But the evidence left little room for natural explanations. Each pass and each adjustment was consistent with a single unsettling implication that this was not a visitor drifting randomly. It was a traveler with intent, moving through the solar system in a way that demanded recognition. And yet, there was no explosion, no visible engine, no smoke or flame, just deliberate, impossible-looking movement. It left the scientists feeling exposed, as though they were staring at something that had been watching them, planning its path while they merely tracked it. The more they examined, the harder it became to defend coincidence. 3I Atlas was threading with precision, and the universe they thought they understood suddenly felt suspiciously conscious.
3-Eye Atlas. It does give scientists a rare chance to study something from beyond our solar system.
And if its motion suggested deliberate control, the object's physical structure only amplified the unease, revealing features that defied every expectation of a natural interstellar object. An internal structure that acts like a machine.
We've got some fresh images of 3-Eye Atlas, a third ever interstellar object observed from Earth.
As 3-Eye Atlas drifted closer, the focus shifted from its trajectory to its very body. At first, astronomers were content to watch it spin through space like any other interstellar visitor in a slow tumble in the void. But something in the light curves did not add up. While the object rotated chaotically, as if tossed by gravity and collisions, its gas jets stubbornly remained locked in precise directions. Normally, chaotic rotation scrambles the flow of material, but here, jets cut through space in the same orientation for weeks. This was not a subtle anomaly, but yet another glaring contradiction. For the jets to behave this way, the material had to be channeled internally, guided along fixed pathways rather than leaking freely into the vacuum. That meant a structure inside the object was something coherent and deliberate, unlike the loose rubble piles that formed comets over billions of years. Researchers exchanged quiet, uncomfortable glances in control rooms. If this were a natural comet, it should have been uneven, unpredictable, and collapsing under its own spin. Instead, it still moved like a machine following its own rules. Infrared and optical monitoring added another layer of unease. Brightness measurements revealed a rhythm of 16 hours. Every 16 hours, the coma expanded and contracted in a subtle pulsing that repeated with almost surgical precision. Scientists called it breathing in private memos, though they quickly retracted the metaphor when writing formal reports. The cycle was too regular to be an accident of sublimation and too consistent to be forced by sunlight or solar wind. The pattern implied timing, control, and again, intent. Even stranger, the pulse persisted despite changing solar conditions. Whether the object faced the sun directly or drifted into shadowed angles, the cycle did not falter like it had an internal clock, not in the form of a chemical reaction, but a process that kept time. The more the data accumulated, the harder it became to view the object as a passive wanderer. Meanwhile, shape modeling based on light curves added another unnerving detail.
In our case of 3-Eye Atlas, it looks like a fuzzy ball of light.
3-Eye Atlas was not the irregular, jagged mass typical of comets or rubble aggregates. Its form resembled a teardrop that was smooth, elongated, and aerodynamic in a way no natural aggregation should allow. Observers noted that the combination of its rotation, pulsing, and shape was coherent, as if every part of the object was engineered to maintain balance, stability, and function. The private discussions in observatories grew heavier as some researchers reportedly began phrasing notes not in terms of comet behavior, but in terms of controlled release. The difference was subtle in words, profound in implication.
Of the wow signal and 3-Eye Atlas are aligned, chance probability of 0.6%.
This was not material falling apart. This was material being directed, guided, and likely managed by something inside. And still, there were no sparks, no machinery visible, or any heat signatures to suggest engines. But with every piece of data from James Webb, the idea that 3-Eye Atlas was merely a chunk of ice and rock, drifting harmlessly through space, was collapsing under the weight of observation. The object was not broken, but methodical, and in every measured parameter, from internal venting to rhythmic pulses to its teardrop shape, seemed to follow a design. Observers were left with a chilling thought. If the trajectory suggested navigation, the structure itself suggested planning. And if both were true, the universe had just given humanity a visitor that acted more like a machine than a remnant of random cosmic processes. And when scientists widened the lens beyond the object itself, the broader cosmic context made the implications far darker, hinting that 3-Eye Atlas might not be alone or entirely natural. A cosmic coincidence that refuses to stay quiet. As astronomers retraced 3-Eye Atlas's path through the solar system, an unexpected pattern emerged. When projected backward across interstellar space, its trajectory narrowed to a tiny patch of sky, the same general region where the infamous 1977 WOW signal had been detected decades earlier. That single unexplained radio burst had puzzled scientists for years. The origin of this fleeting anomaly with no repeat remained a mystery, and yet here was 3I Atlas, traveling straight from that same sector. The first reaction in observatories was disbelief. The odds of any interstellar object naturally aligning with a spot that had produced a one-time unexplained signal were astronomically small. Publicly, no claims were made, and mainstream reports carefully avoided drawing connections. But among the teams analyzing data from the James Webb telescope, the whispers began. Researchers acknowledged in hushed tones that the overlap was too precise to be dismissed as mere chance.
From images, we also saw that this object is active, which is an indication that this object is in fact a comet.
Something about the sky itself was pointing at a pattern, and humanity had been blind to it until now. The object's chemical signature only added to the unease, and when combined with 3I Atlas's carefully plotted planetary flybys, the picture darkened. Its path carried it past planets with a precision that maximized the likelihood of interaction with worlds capable of capturing debris. Scientists began asking questions they could barely voice. Was 3I Atlas distributing prebiotic material deliberately? Or was it performing a form of targeted panspermia, delivering the building blocks of life like a courier moving with purpose through the stars? As more data poured in, additional anomalies appeared. Infrared and optical surveys hinted at faint, trailing fragments in the form of small, shadowy objects moving in similar directions to 3I Atlas.
We cannot really pinpoint the nucleus size. It's partially due to the size of the object, but also it's partially due to the activity.
Too small to detect clearly, too precise to ignore, they suggested the object might not be alone. Some analysts privately described 3I Atlas as a formation, and the leader of a procession of interstellar travelers. If true, Earth had not merely brushed against a single visitor. Rather, humanity had encountered the vanguard of something far larger, something moving with coordination through the solar system. The implications were disquieting. For decades, scientists had studied interstellar visitors as isolated phenomena, rare rocks from afar, and chance passers-by. Now, 3I Atlas challenged that notion. Its path, chemistry, and potential companions hinted at intent rather than accident. And intent, once suspected, raised the question that no public briefing would touch. If this object was delivering material deliberately, why now? Why here? And why had nothing in human records or media prepared anyone for this possibility? Internal communications reportedly shifted at this point. Discussions moved from "what is this?" to "why is this happening?" Observers found themselves considering scenarios that bordered on science fiction. Possibilities like coordinated interstellar formations, targeted chemical seeding of habitable planets, and links to unexplained cosmic signals all converged quietly with a precision that no natural object should possess. For some researchers, the unease grew to a point that made routine analysis feel impossible. The cosmic coincidence of the WOW signal alignment, the carefully chosen planetary path, the chemical payload, and the trailing fragments could not be reduced to probability. Each layer of data reinforced the others, forming a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Humanity was no longer simply watching an interstellar object pass by. The solar system was part of a design, observed and perhaps manipulated by a force moving across the stars in ways we were only beginning to glimpse. And with that realization, the question stopped being what 3I Atlas is and became why it came here at all. The implication scientists won't say out loud. There came a point, quietly and without announcement, when the discussion around 3I Atlas stopped moving forward. Not because the mystery was solved, but because every attempt to solve it began leading to the same place. Chemistry could be explained in isolation, trajectory could be stretched into probability, and structure could be hand-waved as rare formation. But taken together, the object resisted explanation in a way that felt deliberate rather than frustrating. This was the moment when coincidence stopped being a useful word. Internally, the language shifted again. Instead of asking what natural process could produce such behavior, some researchers reportedly began asking a more dangerous question. What if no natural process did? What if 3I Atlas was not a rock behaving strangely, but something shaped to behave exactly this way? Perhaps it was not alive in any biological sense, or it was not broadcasting messages and flashing signals, but it could be functional and purpose-built. That idea never appeared in journals or reached press briefings, but it lingered in private conversations because it explained something that nothing else could. A functional object does not need to look dramatic or announce itself. It only needs to work. From that perspective, many of the strangest aspects of 3I Atlas stopped looking like mysteries and started looking like features. The preserved chemistry no longer seemed accidental, the regulated emissions no longer looked like decay, and the trajectory through the planetary plane no longer looked lucky. Even the near miss with Jupiter's gravity stopped feeling dangerous and started feeling calculated. What unsettled scientists like a system that knew exactly how close it could pass without losing control. There was no signal or attempt to be noticed beyond what careful observation would reveal, and that raised an uncomfortable possibility. Observation does not require communication, and surveying does not require permission. A system does not announce itself to the environment it is sampling. In that light, James Webb did not uncover something that had just arrived, already moving through its process and completing a task that did not involve us directly. Humanity was not the subject of contact, but a mere part of the environment. This reframed the entire encounter in a way that left little room for comfort. If 3I Atlas was a functional artifact, then its silence was not restraint but indifference. Its behavior suggested it did not need to interact with Earth any more than a satellite needs to announce itself to the terrain it maps. The most disturbing implication followed naturally from that realization. If an object like this could pass through the inner solar system, preserve its structure, complete its trajectory, and leave without disruption, then detection was never the barrier. Awareness was. We noticed this one because our instruments finally became sensitive enough, not because it behaved differently. And that raised a question no one wanted to answer publicly. How many similar objects might have passed through before we could see them? How many might still be passing through now, following trajectories we do not recognize because we are not looking for intent, only debris? If that interpretation is even partially correct, then 3I Atlas was not an event but a brief moment where human observation intersected with a process that does not center us, does not acknowledge us, and does not need to slow down for us. If one such object exists, then the universe does not need to be full of visitors. It only needs to contain a few, and they do not need to arrive loudly before they get what they want. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos.